Two bands of hunter-gatherers meet at a river in the dry season. Both need the water. Both are armed. There are maybe 30 people on each side, and every adult remembers a killing. What happens next decides whether either group exists in a year. And what actually happens over and over across tens of thousands of years in every continent humans reached is this: one group hands over a daughter, and the other hands back a sister. Nobody dies that day. That exchange is the oldest version of the thing you now call a wedding. It was not about love. Nobody in that riverbed was thinking about happiness. They were thinking about blood debt, about hunger, about who would feed whose children if the deer disappeared. Marriage was invented as a weapon against extinction, and it worked so well that it outlasted the world that built it. It is older than writing, older than farming, older than the wheel. And for almost all of its existence, the person getting married had no say in it at all. Start with the biology, because the deal has to be built on something. Humans are strange among primates. A chimpanzee mother raises her infant essentially alone. A human infant is born helpless, stays helpless for years, and needs somewhere between 8 and 13 million calories to reach adulthood. One person cannot supply that. Anthropologists studying the Hadza of Tanzania and the Ake of Paraguay found the same pattern in both. Mothers gather, fathers hunt, and the surplus flows to children. Not because it is romantic, because the arithmetic of a human childhood does not close otherwise. So, pair bonding came first, long before ceremony. Something in our ancestors' bodies shifted toward it. Male and female chimpanzees differ enormously in size, which is what you see in species where males fight each other for access to many females. In Australopithecus, roughly 3 million years ago, that size gap was still wide. By the time you reach Homo erectus, it is narrowed to something close to modern humans, where men average maybe 15% larger than women. That shrinking gap is a fossil of changing social structure. Less fighting between males. More stable partnerships. The skeletons are recording the beginning of the family. But a pair bond is not marriage. A bond is two people. Marriage is two groups. And the leap between those things is where it gets dark. Every foraging band faces a problem it cannot solve internally. It is too small. 30 people cannot supply 30 people with partners, generation after generation, without inbreeding into collapse. So bands must trade. And when you hand a person to a neighboring group, you have not only solved genetics, you have created an obligation. Their children are now your grandchildren. Their hunting ground is now somewhere your relatives live. Attacking them means attacking your own blood. The anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss spent his career arguing this was the foundation of human society itself, that the incest taboo is not really about avoiding harm, it is about forcing exchange. Marry inside the group and you keep your daughters. Marry outside and you buy allies. Every society that survived chose allies. Look at what these unions actually look like, and the romance drains out fast. Among the Yanomami of the Amazon, marriages are negotiated between men, often when the girl is a child, and a village with many marriage ties to its neighbors is a village that gets warned before a raid. Among Aboriginal Australian groups, elaborate kinship sections dictated who could marry whom across enormous distances. Systems so precise that a stranger walking into a camp 1,000 kilometers from home could be placed instantly into a category that told everyone whether he was a potential husband, a brother, or an enemy. Those rules move people, water rights, songs, and safe passage across a continent. That is a diplomatic infrastructure disguised as a family. And notice what is missing from all of it. No priest, no god, no document. For the overwhelming majority of the time humans have been marrying, marriage had nothing to do with religion. It was witnessed, not sanctified. The community watched, ate, remembered, and that memory was the contract. Then agriculture arrives, roughly 12,000 years ago, and the whole machine changes shape. Foragers own almost nothing. You cannot accumulate wealth you have to carry. But a farmer owns a field, and a field does not move, and it must pass to someone specific when the farmer dies. Suddenly, the question of who fathered which child is not a curiosity. It is the deed to the land. This is the moment marriage stops being only an alliance and becomes property law. And it is also the moment the control of women's sexuality becomes an economic instrument rather than a social preference. Watch it get written down. The Code of Hammurabi, Babylon, around 1750 BCE, devotes dozens of its laws to marriage and reads like a commercial statute. A man is not properly married without a contract. A dowry follows the woman and returns to her family if she dies childless. Adultery by a wife carries death by drowning. There is no clause anywhere about affection, because affection was not the subject. Egypt kept marriage almost entirely secular for 3,000 years. Surviving contracts on papyrus list goods, maintenance, and what happens on divorce, and no temple is involved. In Republican Rome, the standard form was marriage sine manu. The wife stayed legally attached to her father's family, her property stayed separate, and the union existed as long as both sides intended it to. Roman aristocrats married and divorced to reshuffle political factions. Julius Caesar married his only daughter Julia to Pompey, a man roughly his own age, specifically to bind an alliance. When Julia died in childbirth, the alliance died with her, and within 4 years the two men were at war and Rome was tearing itself apart. That is how load-bearing these arrangements were. A marriage failing could mean a civil war. Religion attached itself late and hesitantly. The Christian Church spent centuries treating marriage as a private matter it had opinions about. It was not until 1215, at the Fourth Lateran Council, that the Church required marriages to be publicly announced, and not until the Council of Trent in 1563 that a priest and witnesses became formally necessary for a valid Catholic marriage. In England, marriage was not required to happen in a church until Lord Hardwicke's Act of 1753. Before that, a couple in Britain could be validly married simply by saying so to each other. The white dress you picture is younger still. Queen Victoria wore one in 1840 and started a fashion. So where does love come in? It comes in when the economics stop requiring the deal. For a peasant family in medieval Europe, a marriage was a merger of labor. You needed someone who could plow, spin, brew, birth children, and survive. Choosing a partner because you found them beautiful was not immoral so much as reckless, like betting the harvest on a feeling. Love existed, of course, it just wasn't what marriage was for. Medieval romance literature is overwhelmingly about love outside marriage, because that is where it was expected to occur. What broke the old system was industry. When wages come from a factory rather than family land, a young person can eat without their father's field. Move that person to a city, pay them individually, and the parental veto quietly loses its teeth. Historians place the shift in the late 18th and 19th centuries, and the numbers behind it are stark. For most of history, roughly a third to half of children died before reaching adulthood, and a marriage was above all a machine for producing survivors. When child mortality collapses and wealth stops flowing through inheritance, that machine has spare capacity. And what fills it is emotion. The love match is barely 200 years old. Measured against a practice that predates agriculture, it is the newest possible arrangement, an experiment still running, and one whose results are genuinely mixed. Nearly every society that has adopted it has also seen divorce rise, because a union built on feeling ends when the feeling does, while a union built on land and alliance has other reasons to hold. Which brings the whole thing back to that riverbed. The people who made the first marriages were not being cruel when they traded their children. They were doing the only mathematics available to them. They lived in bands of 30 in a world that would kill you for being alone, and they discovered that a shared grandchild is the strongest peace treaty ever devised because it cannot be broken without breaking yourself. Every layer added since, the dowry, the contract, the priest, the ring, the vow, is scaffolding built on that single primal calculation. And you inherited the structure without the reason you get to choose. You choose based on how someone makes you feel at 2 in the morning, on whether they laugh at the same things, on chemistry that no elder negotiated and no village approved. Your ancestors would have found that not just strange, but dangerous. gambling the survival of a lineage on an emotion known to fade. So the question is not whether they were wrong. They lasted 100,000 years. The question is what your version is actually for, now that the hunger and the raiding parties and the fields are gone. Because for almost all of human history, marriage answered a question about survival. Yours has to answer a different one, and you are among the first generations of humans who get to decide entirely on your own what that answer is.